When you grow up in a small town like mine, population barely breaking 100, you get used to the quiet. Summers here are all about long days, working outside, and clear nights with nothing but crickets and frogs for company. My name's Jake, and this past summer I had a job at the supply depot just a couple of miles down the road from my house. Not much happens around here, but what I'm about to tell you, it's something I'll never forget. So this one night, I was walking home from work. The road's pretty much just a narrow strip of pavement cutting through thick woods. No streetlights, no houses along the way. Just trees, crickets, and the occasional hoot of an owl. I had my headphones in, blasting some old rock tunes, trying to drown out how creepy the dark can get when you're all alone. About halfway home, I saw something weird. A bright red balloon stuck in a barbed wire fence along the side of the road. It didn't make sense. I mean, who the heck would bring a balloon all the way out here? Curiosity got the best of me, so I walked over and grabbed it. It squeaked a little when I gave it a squeeze. Creepy, right? But at the time, I just thought it was some kid's balloon that floated off. I tossed it to the side and kept walking. The next night, everything started to feel off. It wasn't anything big at first, just this weird tension in the air. You know that feeling, like you're being watched? Yeah, that. I was on the same road, same routine, headphones in when I heard it. Laughter. Not like a giggle or someone cracking up at a joke. This was high-pitched, almost like a cackle. It sent chills straight down my spine. I ripped out my headphones and stopped dead in my tracks. The woods went silent, except for my own breathing. "Hello?" I called out, hoping it was just my imagination. But then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the woods, just barely visible in the moonlight. It was someone dressed like a clown. White face paint, red nose, the whole creepy getup. Except it wasn't a fun circus clown. This guy looked like he crawled out of a nightmare. His clothes were filthy, and the makeup on his face was smeared, like he'd been crying. He didn't move, didn't say anything. Just stood there, staring at me. My heart was pounding so loud I thought he might hear it. I took a step back, and that's when he tilted his head to the side, almost like he was studying me. Then out of nowhere, he laughed again. The same cackle I'd heard before. I bolted, didn't stop running until I was safe inside my house. Even then, I locked every door, every window, and sat in the living room with all the lights on, clutching a baseball bat. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't shake the image of that clown standing there, watching me. The next day, I tried to tell myself it was just some sick prank, maybe a couple of kids messing around. But deep down, I knew better. And as you'll see, this was only the beginning. I couldn't get that clown out of my head the next day at work. Every time I stopped to catch my breath or load supplies, I'd see his face. Those black eyes, the dirty clothes, that laugh. It was eating me alive. So during my lunch break, I told my best friend Matt about it. Matt's the type who loves creepy stories and weird mysteries, so I figured he'd think it was cool or something. Instead, he got real quiet. "You've heard the stories, right?" he finally said, leaning in like he was about to drop some secret. "Stories? What stories?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "About the clowns," he said. "People have been seeing them in the woods for years. They show up, freak people out, and then disappear. No one knows who they are or what they want." Great. Exactly what I didn't want to hear. But Matt wasn't done. He suggested we check it out after work, go into the woods, see if we could find anything. I thought he was crazy, but he convinced me. If it's just some kids messing around, we'll catch them. And if it's something more, well, at least we'll know. That evening, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a pocket knife Matt had, we walked into the woods where I'd seen the clown. At first, it was just trees and shadows. But then we found it. A clearing with a bunch of stuff scattered around. There were masks, red noses, and balloons tied to branches. Some of the balloons had weird symbols drawn on them, and there were footprints, lots of them, leading deeper into the woods. Matt picked up one of the noses and laughed nervously. "See? It's just a bunch of pranksters." But I wasn't so sure. The air felt heavy, like we weren't supposed to be there. We decided to leave, but as we turned back, I swear I heard a whisper, "Stay and play." That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Even in my house, with all the doors locked, I felt exposed, like eyes were on me. And then it happened. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on my porch. Slow, deliberate. I froze. My heart was pounding as I grabbed the baseball bat and crept to the window. When I peeked out, I saw him, the clown from the road. He was standing there holding a balloon, staring at my front door. I backed away, my mind racing. Should I call the cops? Should I hide? Before I could decide, there was a loud bang. The clown was hitting the door, laughing that horrible laugh. "You've got something of ours," he shouted, his voice muffled by the door. "Give it back and we'll let you go." Give what back? The balloon? The nose? My blood ran cold as I realized he meant me. I wasn't giving him anything, so I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. Out the back door, through the yard, and onto the road. I didn't stop running until I was halfway to Matt's house, but they were faster. I heard their laughter first, then footsteps more than one. I looked back and saw them. 3 clowns, all in filthy costumes, chasing me with knives and bats. My lungs were on fire, but I didn't dare stop. I just kept running, praying for a miracle. And then, headlights. A truck came barreling down the road, horn blaring. The clowns scattered like cockroaches, disappearing into the woods. The driver stopped, and I jumped into the passenger seat, gasping for air. "What the hell's going on?" the guy asked, looking as freaked out as I felt. I couldn't even speak. All I knew was that I was alive. For now. The next morning, I sat in Matt's kitchen, replaying everything in my head. I told him what happened, from the clown on my porch to the chase down the road. Matt didn't laugh this time. He was just as shaken as I was. That's when he suggested we go back to the clearing. "Jake, if we don't figure this out, they'll just keep coming. You said there were more of them last night, right? That's not random. Something bigger is going on," Matt said, pacing around his small kitchen. I didn't want to go back, but he was right. This wasn't going to end on its own. So that afternoon, we packed flashlights, a bat, and some pepper spray Matt's older brother had lying around. As we walked into the woods, every noise felt amplified. The crunch of leaves, the snap of twigs, it all made my skin crawl. When we reached the clearing, it was worse than before. The symbols on the balloons were drawn on the ground now, huge and smeared like someone had used blood. The masks we saw earlier were arranged in a circle, and in the center was something that made my stomach drop. A table. On it was a red balloon and a single red clown nose, just like the one I found. Then we heard it. The laughter. Not distant this time, but close, too close. Before we could run, figures started stepping out from the trees one by one. They were all dressed as clowns, faces painted in grotesque smears of white, red, and black. There had to be at least 10 of them, and they were circling us, laughing in that same bone-chilling way. One of them, the tallest, stepped forward. His voice was low and gravelly. "You shouldn't have taken what's ours. Now you'll stay and play." Matt grabbed my arm and whispered, "Run when I say." I could feel his hand shaking, but I nodded. The clowns started closing in, their movements slow and deliberate, like they were enjoying the game. "Now!" Matt shouted, and we bolted. I didn't even look back. The woods were a blur as we sprinted, dodging trees and jumping over roots. The laughter echoed behind us, followed by heavy footsteps. They were chasing us again, and this time there was nowhere to hide. One of them grabbed Matt's arm, pulling him to the ground. I turned back, adrenaline surging, and swung the bat as hard as I could. It hit the clown's head with a sickening thud, and he dropped. Matt scrambled to his feet, and we kept running. We burst out of the woods and onto the road, where a car's headlights nearly blinded us. The driver slammed on the brakes, and we jumped into the back of his truck, yelling for him to go. The clowns reached the edge of the woods just as the truck sped off. I saw them standing there, watching us disappear into the distance, but the tall one, he smiled like this wasn't over. The driver took us straight to the police station. We told the officers everything, from the clearing to the attack. They listened, but you could see it in their faces. They didn't believe us. Still, they agreed to check it out. Matt and I sat in the station waiting, hoping they'd find something. When the officers came back, their expressions were unreadable. "We found the clearing," one of them said, but there was nothing there. No masks, no symbols, just an empty space. It didn't make sense. Matt and I had seen it with our own eyes. How could it all just disappear? The cops told us to go home and get some rest, but I knew this wasn't over. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, heard their laughter. The next morning, there was a note taped to my front door. It was written in red ink and it only said 3 words: "We'll be back." I don't know who these clowns are or what they want, but one thing's for sure. I'll never look at the woods the same way again, and I'll never ever walk home alone. Hi everyone, I'm Ben, and let me tell you about one of the scariest nights of my life. I'm not exaggerating when I say this still gives me chills just thinking about it. This happened last summer when I was 15, and honestly, it's something I'll never forget. So my town's pretty boring. Like seriously, there's nothing cool to do unless you count hanging out at the gas station or walking to the corner store. But every year, we have this summer festival that's kind of a big deal. They set up rides, food trucks, and even a circus. It's the one time the town feels alive, so of course everyone shows up. I'm more of a stay-at-home and play video games kind of guy, but my best friend Ethan convinced me to go. "Come on, man," he said. "You can't spend all summer locked in your room." He had a point, so I threw on some sneakers and met him at the festival. It was crowded, noisy, and smelled like fried everything. Ethan and I tried out a few rides, grabbed some corn dogs, and even won a plushie at one of those rigged carnival games. It was fun, way more fun than I expected. But then we noticed something weird. At the edge of the festival grounds, there was this small, dark tent. No bright lights, no flashy signs, just a faded banner that said, "The Laughing Tent." "That looks creepy," I said. Of course, Ethan wanted to check it out. He's the adventurous one between us. I wasn't thrilled about it, but he dragged me along. "What's the worst that could happen?" he joked. Famous last words, right? Inside the tent, it was dark, with a weird smell like old fabric and something metallic. There were a few rows of folding chairs, mostly empty. On a small stage, a group of clowns was performing. But these weren't the happy, colorful clowns you'd expect at a festival. Their costumes were tattered, their makeup smeared, and their smiles off. Something about them just felt wrong. One clown stood out. A tall guy with a skinny frame and a hat that looked way too big for his head. He moved awkwardly, almost like a puppet on strings. The others called him Midnight Chuckle. His laughter was low and raspy, more like a growl than a laugh. At first, we thought it was just a bad act, but then Midnight Chuckle's hat fell off during his routine and landed near my feet. Without thinking, I picked it up and stuffed it in my jacket pocket. I don't even know why I did it. Maybe I thought it'd be a funny keepsake. Ethan nudged me and whispered, "Dude, don't be that guy." I just shrugged. The clown didn't even seem to notice. Or so I thought. As the performance wrapped up, I noticed Midnight Chuckle staring at me. Not just looking, staring. His eyes were cold, almost empty, like he wasn't really human. I nudged Ethan and said, "Let's get out of here." He didn't argue. On the way out, I kept fiddling with the hat. It felt strange. Sticky, like it had some kind of residue on it. I figured it was just old and gross. But as we walked, I started hearing faint laughter. At first, I thought it was part of the festival noise. Then it got louder, clearer. And it wasn't coming from behind us, it was coming from inside the hat. Ethan went home one way and I went another. By the time I was alone, the laughter was all I could hear. That's when I turned around and saw him. Midnight Chuckle. He was standing in the middle of the street, still as a statue, his empty eyes locked on me. "I believe you have something of mine," he said in a voice that sounded like nails on a chalkboard. And that's when the nightmare began. I froze. My heart felt like it was about to explode out of my chest. Midnight Chuckle stood there, his pale face half hidden by the shadows, but his eyes, Those empty, soulless eyes were locked on me. I wanted to say something, maybe apologize or explain, but no words came out. Instead, I turned and bolted. The laughter started again, louder this time, and it felt like it was coming from all around me. I've never run so fast in my life. My sneakers pounded against the pavement as I tore down the empty street. I glanced back once and saw him, not running, but walking, yet somehow keeping pace with me. It didn't make sense. "You can't outrun me, kid," his voice echoed, mocking and sinister. I cut through a side alley hoping to lose him, but the laughter followed me. It felt like it was inside my head now, gnawing at my sanity. I burst out onto a dirt path leading toward the woods. I knew the trails well enough, they'd lead me straight to my neighborhood. But as I sprinted into the trees, the shadows seemed darker, deeper. The branches above blocked out the moonlight, leaving me almost blind. The forest was silent except for my ragged breathing and the crunch of leaves under my feet. I thought I'd lost him until I heard a branch snap behind me. I didn't dare look back. My legs burned, but I kept going, weaving through the trees, trying to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. Then I tripped. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, the hat flying out of my jacket pocket. My palms stung from the impact, but I scrambled to my knees, searching for the hat. I didn't want it anymore, but some part of me knew I couldn't leave it behind. When I grabbed it, the laughter stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. I held the hat tightly, my hands trembling, and looked around. That's when I saw him again, standing just a few feet away. He wasn't laughing anymore. Instead, he tilted his head, almost curious. "Why run?" he asked, his voice softer now, but no less chilling. "All I want is what's mine." I backed away slowly, clutching the hat. "Take it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I tossed the hat toward him, but he didn't move. He just stared at me, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Too late," he said. "Now it's part of you." I stood frozen, his words ringing in my ears. Part of me? What the hell did he mean by that? I thought, panic spreading through my body. Midnight Chuckle stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. Desperation took over, and I bolted again, deeper into the woods. I stumbled across an old abandoned cabin hidden among the trees. Without thinking, I ran inside and slammed the door behind me, hoping to find something, anything to defend myself. The cabin was dusty and filled with old rotting furniture. On a table, I spotted a stack of newspapers. The headlines made my blood run cold. Missing children linked to traveling circus. The articles described disappearances that happened every summer, always in towns visited by a mysterious carnival. The descriptions of the clowns matched Midnight Chuckle and his crew exactly. I realized then that this wasn't just a creepy guy in makeup. This was something darker, something evil. And now I was caught in their game. I heard the door creak open behind me. Slowly I turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway, his smile wider than ever. "You can't hide from the laughter," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. I backed away until I hit the wall. "Stay away from me," I shouted, grabbing a broken chair leg as a weapon. Midnight Chuckle didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The air grew colder, and I could feel the weight of his presence pressing down on me. "You took something that doesn't belong to you," he said. "Now, you must pay the price." I swung the chair leg at him, but he caught it midair like it was nothing. His strength was unnatural. He yanked it from my hands and threw it aside, his laughter filling the room. Desperate, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the hat. "Fine, take it. Just leave me alone." He tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "It's not that simple," he said. "The hat isn't just an object. It's a bond. You invited me in when you took it." Realizing there was no reasoning with him, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed a lantern from the table and smashed it on the floor, setting the cabin ablaze. The flames spread quickly, and Midnight Chuckle let out a piercing scream, his laughter finally silenced. I ran out of the cabin as it went up in flames, the fire lighting up the dark woods. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the forest and saw the lights of my neighborhood. My legs felt like jelly, but I didn't dare slow down until I was inside my house, locking every door and window. My mom found me sitting on the floor, shaking and covered in soot. "What happened?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. I wanted to tell her everything, but how could I explain something so insane? I got lost in the woods," I lied. The police came later, investigating the fire in the forest. They found the remains of the cabin, but no sign of Midnight Chuckle. They wrote it off as a random arson case, but I knew the truth. Weeks passed and life slowly returned to normal. But every now and then, I hear faint laughter in the distance, even when I'm alone. I don't know if Midnight Chuckle is gone for good, or if he's still out there waiting. All I know is I'll never set foot in a carnival again. And if you ever see a clown with a crooked smile and a laugh that sends chills down your spine, run. Three days ago, my life changed in ways I never thought possible. You've probably heard about those creepy clowns making headlines, right? People seeing them on highways, pranking drivers. Well, I had my own encounter, but mine wasn't a prank. It was a nightmare. I live in rural Maine, out in the middle of nowhere. My driveway winds through thick woods before connecting to the road. It's peaceful during the day, but once the sun goes down, it feels like you're the last person on Earth. It started on a Tuesday evening. I was out fixing a broken section of the fence by the driveway. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a person-shaped shadow moving along the road. But no, it was real. A clown, or a man dressed as one, walking slowly along the edge of the road. His outfit was filthy, like he'd been rolling in the dirt. The mask he wore was even worse, grimy, torn, with exaggerated features that looked more grotesque than funny. I froze. He didn't say a word, didn't make any sudden moves. He just stopped at the end of my driveway, turned his head slowly toward me, and stared. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was some idiot playing a prank. So, I laughed, awkwardly, and waved. He didn't wave back. Instead, he tilted his head, like a curious dog, then turned away and walked into the woods. That should have been it. Weird, but harmless, right? That night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every creak, every rustle outside made my skin crawl. I triple-checked the locks on my doors and windows before heading to bed. Then, around midnight, I heard something. It started faint, like footsteps crunching leaves outside my bedroom window. I told myself it was just an animal, but when I got up and checked my security cameras, my heart nearly stopped. There he was, the clown. He was walking around my property, moving slowly from one window to the next like he was inspecting them. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone and called Sam, my neighbor and best friend. Sam's an ex-Marine, the kind of guy who's seen things most of us only see in movies. I told him about the clown. "Stay inside," he said. "Lock everything, grab your rifle, and don't open the door for anything. I'll be over in the morning." The rest of the night was torture. I stayed up, clutching my rifle, staring at the security feed. Around 3 a.m. I heard it, a slow, deliberate knock at the back door. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. My breathing was so loud I was afraid he might hear me. Then the knocking got louder. Bang, bang, bang. I crept toward the kitchen, my hands shaking, and peeked through the blinds. There he was, standing inches from the glass, staring at me. His head was tilted again, his mask somehow more terrifying up close. He raised his hand and tapped the glass slowly, as if daring me to react. I panicked. I ran upstairs, locked myself in my bedroom, and called 911. "Stay on the line," the dispatcher said. "Officers are on their way." The next 5 minutes felt like an eternity. I could hear him below me, pounding on the back door, screaming like a lunatic. It wasn't human. It sounded guttural, like something from an animal. Then, suddenly, it stopped. I heard a new sound, a gunshot. I looked out the window and saw Sam, standing at the edge of the woods with his rifle raised. The clown was gone, disappeared into the darkness. When the cops arrived, they combed the property but didn't find much, just some footprints leading into the woods. Sam and I decided to follow the trail ourselves the next morning. Deep in the forest, we found an old cabin I didn't even know existed. The place reeked of mildew and something worse. Inside, we found photos, dozens of them taped to the walls. They were pictures of people, all missing, their faces circled in red. There were clown costumes too, hung neatly on a rack like trophies. Then we heard it, a low, guttural laugh echoing from the shadows. The clown stepped out, holding a knife. Sam didn't hesitate. He fired a warning shot, but the clown didn't flinch. He lunged at us. Sam shot him in the leg and he went down, but he was still laughing. This awful, raspy sound that made my blood run cold. Before we could grab him, he pulled something from his pocket, a smoke bomb, and disappeared into the haze. The cops came back, searched the cabin, and found evidence of a cult operating in the area. They arrested 2 other people, but the clown, the leader, was still missing. I moved out of that house the next week. I couldn't stay there, not with everything I'd seen. But even now in my new place, I sometimes feel like he's watching me. So if you ever see a clown in the woods, don't laugh it off. I never thought I'd share this story. For years, it's been a weight I've carried, a nightmare etched into my memory. Maybe by telling it, I can finally let it go. Or maybe someone out there will recognize the signs before it's too late. I was 14, living in a small, sleepy town where nothing ever happened. It was the kind of place where the highlight of the year was the county fair, set up in the crumbling parking lot of an abandoned mall. That fall, the fair came as usual, bringing its rickety rides, greasy food stands, and overpriced games. My best friend Mike, ever the adventurer, convinced me to go. I wasn't thrilled. Ever since I was a kid, clowns had given me the creeps. Something about their painted faces and forced cheerfulness always felt wrong. But Mike was persuasive, and besides, what else was I going to do? My parents were at a work event, and my siblings were off at a sleepover. I was on my own. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of popcorn and sugar. The fairground was a cacophony of laughter, screaming rides, and the occasional bark of a carnival worker. Despite the festive atmosphere, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but a shiver ran down my spine as we approached the entrance. Mike, oblivious to my unease, was already diving headfirst into the chaos, dragging me along. We played a few games, losing more money than we should have on rigged booths, and even tried one of the less terrifying rides. For a while, I almost managed to relax. Then we saw him. He wasn't like the other clowns bustling around the fair. Most were loud and garish, handing out balloons and cracking bad jokes. This one stood apart. He was tall and thin, dressed in black and white like a mime, with a painted grin that stretched unnaturally across his face. He held a single black balloon. At first, he just stood there, motionless, staring at us. Mike noticed him too and nudged me with a grin. "Creepy, huh? Probably part of some haunted attraction," he said, clearly unfazed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. His grin wasn't friendly. It was predatory. And his eyes, they were alive with something dark, something that made my stomach churn. "Let's go," I muttered, pulling Mike away. But the clown didn't stay behind. As we moved through the fair, he seemed to follow us. Not overtly, not running or calling out, he'd simply appear, standing by a game booth or leaning against a ride, always holding that black balloon. His grin never wavered. Mike tried to laugh it off, even making a joke about the clown having a crush on me. I didn't laugh. My skin prickled with the sense that we were being hunted. By the time we decided to leave, the fair had grown quieter, the crowd thinning out. The lights, once festive, now cast eerie shadows across the asphalt. We headed for the exit only to find the clown standing directly in our path. This time he wasn't alone. 3 other clowns flanked him, their expressions identical, painted grins that didn't match their eyes. One of them tilted its head as if studying us. The others simply stood still, holding balloons of various colors. "What the hell is this?" Mike muttered, his bravado slipping. I grabbed his arm, pulling him towards a side exit. The clowns didn't move, but their eyes followed us. As we hurried out, I swore I heard faint laughter behind us. It wasn't cheerful. It was low and guttural, like something trying to mimic human joy. The walk home was unnervingly quiet. The streets, usually alive with distant chatter or the hum of passing cars, felt deserted. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. "That was weird, right? Like, really weird?" Mike asked, his voice unusually subdued. "Yeah, let's just get home," I said, glancing over my shoulder. The street behind us was empty, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Then we heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps. We turned around, but no one was there. The footsteps stopped when we did, then resumed as we started walking again. Panic set in. We broke into a jog, then a full sprint, not stopping until we reached my front porch. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. As soon as we were inside, I locked the door and double-checked it. Mike peered out the window. "I don't see anything," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We moved to my room upstairs where we could watch the street without being seen. For a while, everything seemed normal. Then we saw it. A single black balloon tied to the railing of my porch. It hadn't been there when we came in. "This is messed up," Mike whispered. I grabbed my phone and called my parents. They told us to stay inside, lock everything, and call the police if anything else happened. But before I could hang up, I noticed movement in the yard. The clown was back, standing in the driveway, staring up at my window. This time, his grin was gone. The sound of glass shattering downstairs jolted us into action. "He's inside," Mike hissed. We bolted for the closet, shutting the door just as heavy footsteps echoed up the stairs. My heart felt like it was going to explode. The footsteps stopped right outside the closet. A shadow passed under the door, and then silence. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, a loud bang came from outside. Sirens. The police had arrived. When the officers searched the house, they found no one. But something was left behind. In the middle of the living room was a torn piece of black fabric and a note scrawled in red. "See you soon." Weeks passed. I tried to move on, but the nightmares didn't stop. Then one night, my dad sat me down. He showed me an old newspaper clipping about a traveling circus that had burned down decades ago. Dozens of performers had died, including a group of clowns. One of them had been accused of luring children away during the fair, kids who were never seen again. His signature? A black balloon. "It's just a coincidence," my dad said, but his face betrayed his doubt. I never saw the clown again, but I'll never forget his eyes. They weren't just watching me. They were waiting.